Florida, 1841. The marshlands whispered a kind of danger no white man ever understood. Cypress trees leaned like old sentinels, Spanish moss hung in heavy curtains, and the murky water hid secrets older than the plantation lines carved into it. But among the Seminole people, and especially among the daughters, the swamps were not danger. They were ancestry, they were weapon, they were sanctuary. And for Nkosi, daughter of a Seminole warrior and an enslaved Muskogee woman, the swamp was the one place she could still remember her mother's laughter, before the overseers cut it out of her. Before the shackles, before the screams, when her mother was sold to the Bartram plantation just outside Apalachicola, Nkosi vowed she would find her. But when she arrived, hidden in the thick brush, she saw something worse than she had imagined. Her mother, bound in a cypress shack used for discipline sessions, surrounded by 6 drunken overseers, laughing, planning what they would do to her before dawn. Nkosi's breath went still, and something older than grief rose in her blood, something fierce, ancestral, and merciless. The last time anyone saw those 6 overseers alive, they were pounding on the walls of that same cypress shack, while the flames devoured it whole. This is the story of the Seminole daughter who burned a prison into a pyre, and carried her mother out through fire and smoke as the swamps swallowed the screams behind them. The night Nkosi returned to the swamps near Bartram Plantation, the cicadas were screaming loud enough to drown a heartbeat. She moved carefully, her bare feet silent on the mud, her body painted in streaks of ash and river clay. It was not disguise, it was identity, a ritual as old as her tribe. She was born under a fortune-teller's warning. Your path will cut 2 worlds, child. One blood will bind you, the other will break you. Her father had been a Seminole scout, a man who could vanish into leaves and reappear with enemies at his mercy. Her mother, stolen during the wars, had been forced into the plantations below the Panhandle. Nkosi was raised with both traditions, the stealth of the warriors, the resilience of enslaved women. It made her a child impossible to tame, but tonight she wished she could be anything but herself, anything but the daughter who arrived too late. She crouched behind a fallen log, her dark eyes fixed on the plantation clearing ahead. Lanterns glowed in the distance, swinging from hooks on the porch, and every few minutes a rough laugh broke the silence. Each one tightened her stomach. She had tracked her mother's trail for 7 days across the marshland, sleeping beside gators, wading through thigh-deep water. She was ready for hunger, exhaustion, even blood. But she wasn't ready for the sound she heard now. A muffled cry, a woman's cry. Her mother's. Nkosi froze. Her hands trembled, but only for a heartbeat. Then the warrior side of her, the one her father had trained, swallowed the panic whole. She slithered closer through palmetto and cattails, low as a panther. The cypress shack came into view, a small wooden hut built for punishment, storms, and secrets, a place every enslaved man and woman feared. There were shadows moving inside, 6 of them. She saw their silhouettes bending over someone her mother tied upright to a beam, barely clothed, barely conscious. Nkosi's nails dug into the mud. Her breath shortened, her throat burned. She listened. Hold her chin up, this one ain't supposed to pass out yet. Boss said she's too wild. We'll fix that. Pour more whiskey. She'll scream sweeter. A sickening roar rose in Nkosi's ears, drowning the rest of their words. She should charge in, break throats, cut tendons, tear the room apart. But 6 armed overseers were too many, and she was alone. Her father had taught her rage must serve purpose, not destroy it. So she waited, measured, counted shadows, counted weapons, counted seconds. Then, for the first time, she noticed the torch stand outside the shack, 6 torches burning low, the flames reflecting on the cypress bark like dripping gold. A slow, terrible idea formed, born of desperation, born of vengeance, born of blood. Her mother's soft whimper carried through the thin walls. Nkosi's decision snapped into place. She slipped backward into the swamp, retrieving the bundle she had hidden beneath leaves, dried pine sap, fatwood splinters, and a small clay pot filled with oil she had made herself. The kind of oil that turned flame into fury. She moved like shadow, her breath steady, her hands precise as she coated the wooden seams of the shack's foundation. The scent of pine sap filled the air, sharp, sweet, and deadly. She whispered in Muskogee, a prayer her mother used to braid into her hair. Fire, cleanse what chains defile. Is fording. By the time she finished, her heartbeat was calm. Still, prepared, she touched the nearest torch, letting the flame crawl up her fingers before transferring it to the oil-soaked corner of the shack. The fire caught instantly, a hungry whisper turning into a roar. Inside, one overseer shouted, "What the hell?" Another stumbled toward the door, pulling on the latch, but Nkosi had jammed it with a branch. She didn't blink as the first scream split the night, or the second, or the killing chorus that followed. Her only motion was forward, straight into the smoke, straight to the back window she had loosened with her bare hands. She tore it open. Her mother sagged toward her, too weak to stand. "Ma," Nkosi breathed, tears cutting streaks down her ash-covered cheeks. "I'm here." And as the flames rose behind her, and the overseers beat their fists bloody against the locked door, Nkosi lifted her mother onto her back, just as the shack collapsed in an eruption of orange light. She didn't look back, not once. The swamp swallowed their escape, and behind them, 6 men met a death carved by fire and a daughter's fury. Night came heavy over the Florida cypress swamps, the kind of dark that swallowed sound and breath and doubt. Naya moved through it like a creature born from shadow and wet earth, her bare feet sinking into mud, her hands gripping the long, curved knife she had carried since she was 12. Her mother had carved the handle from river birch. Her father had forged the blade before the soldiers took his life. Every part of it was her inheritance. The plantation lights glowed through the trees like the eyes of predators. 6 overseers were posted tonight. Naya knew each by gait, breath, and cruelty. They thought themselves safe because the swamps frightened them. They told stories of spirits and panthers and Seminole ghosts that slit throats from treetops. They didn't know the real spirit they should fear breathed air just as they did. She crouched low as one of them walked by the fence line, jingling the keys to the punishment shack. Her mother was in there, bound, bruised, waiting for dawn, when they planned to teach her obedience in full view of the other enslaved people. Naya breathed once, deeply. Then she began. She tracked the first overseer until he stepped behind the tobacco shed to smoke. The flame from his match lit the angles of his face, and the moment it died, Naya stepped behind him. The knife was quick, quiet, precise. She lowered him gently so the leaves wouldn't rustle. She dragged him beneath the long hanging moss. The swamp accepted him. The second she found near the stables. He was humming, drunk, the sound drifting into night like an insult. Naya didn't need her knife this time. She pushed him into the trough, held him there, and didn't stop until the bubbles did. But the third, her mother's worst tormentor, found her first. "Ain't supposed to be out here, girl," he sneered, lantern raised. "But I reckon I know what to do with a runaway little Seminole rat." Naya stood, hands empty, face calm. He took the bait. When he grabbed her arm, she used the motion to flip herself behind him, slammed his head into the fence, and rammed her knee into the back of his spine. He dropped, stunned. She picked up the lantern he'd dropped, smashed it across his jaw, then pressed her foot into his throat until the crackling beneath her heel quieted. She whispered nothing. Vengeance needed no words. The fourth and fifth were together. Harder. She stalked them as they circled the back fields, their torches flickering orange against the high grass. She could not take them silently, so she chose differently. A dry patch of cattail fiber in her pocket. A spark stone. No more than 3 seconds. The grass caught fire in a long, thin line like lightning drawn by hand. The overseers shouted, their torches waving wildly as they tried to stomp the flame out. But Naya was already running through the smoke, weaving, striking, vanishing, striking again. One torch fell. A throat opened. A knee shattered. And when the fire died, the men died with it. Only one remained. The 6th overseer, the one who held the shack key now hanging from his belt. A man as tall as a cypress trunk and as mean as a starving wolf. Naya found him at the edge of the creek, staring at the moonlit water. Before she even stepped, he spoke. "I knew it was you, girl." She froze. He turned slowly, smiling not in fear, but in anticipation. "And I've been waitin'." He lunged. She dodged, but not fast enough. His fist clipped her shoulder, sending her spinning into a stump. Pain shot down her arm. He came again faster than she expected. She rolled, kicked mud into his eyes, sprinted around him, grabbed a broken branch, but he caught her ankle. She fell hard. His weight pressed onto her. His breath stank of whiskey and rotted teeth. "You're gonna die slow," he growled. "Then your mama's next." Something inside Naya snapped clean, sharp, unbreakable. She headbutted him. Once. Twice. The third time cracked his nose. He roared, stumbled back, wiping blood from his mouth. But Naya was already up, gripping the broken branch like a spear. He charged. She sidestepped and drove the branch straight through his chest. His breath jerked in his throat. His eyes widened in disbelief. He grabbed the branch, trying to pull it out, but Naya pushed harder, twisting until he fell to his knees. Then she said the only words she spoke that night. "You should never have touched my mother." He collapsed into the mud, the key ringing softly against the roots as it fell from his belt. Naya picked it up, wiped the blood and dirt from her face, and walked toward the punishment shack with firelight flickering behind her. Her mother was waiting. And by dawn, the whole plantation would know what the swamp had already learned. A Seminole daughter does not beg. She does not kneel. She does not forgive. She burns the world that harms her blood. The swamp held its breath. The cypress knees jutted from the black water like teeth, and the thin steam rising from the surface curled around Naya's ankles as she crouched in the reeds. Dawn had not yet broken, but the sky had that pale blue sickness that came right before sunrise. Birds hadn't begun calling. Even the insects were silent. Silence meant danger. Her fingers tightened around the wooden war club strapped to her back. Her father had carved it years before the soldiers came, long before the plantation. The branding iron, the chains. She still remembered him lifting the club in the firelight and saying, "A woman's hands can bless. A woman's hands can break." Tonight, she intended to break. She followed the muffled sound of footsteps, slow and dragging, like boots sinking in mud. The overseers had been restless after the fire. 6 dead men burned alive in the cypress shack, and none of them had died completely clean. The flames had caught too fast. The roof had collapsed too soon. They must have kicked, screamed, choked in their own panic, which meant there were survivors who had seen silhouettes moving in the dark, and those survivors were searching. Naya peeked through a lattice of reeds. 2 overseers trudged through the shallow water, lanterns swinging low. Their torches sputtered in the fog, barely cutting through the thickness. One muttered curses. The other seemed more afraid than angry. "They ain't no swamp ghosts," the first one grumbled. "Somebody lit that shack on purpose. Boss says it was Indians. Boss says a lot of nonsense. Whoever did it knew exactly what they was doing." Naya's jaw clenched. She had known exactly what she was doing. Burning that shack was only the first step. One fire to cover her tracks. One fire to tell them she would not hesitate. But her mother was still not free, and the overseers weren't slowing down. The scared one stopped walking. "We shouldn't be out here alone. Not before daylight. Something's stalking around these parts." "Oh," the bolder overseer spat into the water. "Ain't nothing out here but frogs. Mud. And you being a coward." Naya rose slightly from the reeds, silent as vapor. They were close. Too close. She reached into her bag and withdrew a small woven pouch, one of her mother's old basket-weaving pouches. Inside were crushed herbs, pine ash, and dried river moss. A Seminole trick, a breath of it carried far in damp air. She crushed the pouch between her palms and let the dust drift. A breeze carried it toward them. The brave overseer coughed first. His lantern swung violently as he doubled over, hacking into the fog. The scared one clutched his own throat, eyes wide, trying to shout but producing only wet choking sounds. The ash wasn't poison, not exactly. But it was a swamp mixture that inflamed the throat and blurred the eyes. Her father had taught her to use it when hunting boar. Hunters who breathed it couldn't shout, could barely breathe, couldn't see straight. A perfect tool for silence. Naya moved. She sprang from the reeds like a shadow with teeth. The first overseer didn't even raise his lantern before she cracked the war club across his skull. The wood crunched bone. He fell without a sound. The second reached for his pistol, but his vision was already swimming. Naya struck his wrist, snapping it, then slammed the club into his jaw. He fell backward into the water, thrashing weakly. She knelt over him, one hand on his throat to keep him from rising. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered. He gurgled something, maybe mercy, maybe please. She did not wait to find out. One swift blow ended it. She dragged both bodies deeper into the reeds, letting the water swallow them to the shoulders. They would sink by midday. Gators would handle the rest. The swamp was silent again, but Naya wasn't done. Smoke still clung to her hair from the burned shack. Her muscles still shook with the leftover heat of vengeance. Every breath reminded her, "Your mother is still in chains." She crawled back toward the trail, her body low, her senses sharp. The path leading to the main plantation road was littered with footprints, boot tracks, wagon tracks, and the unmistakable heel marks of a woman forced to walk on split, blistered feet. Her mother's feet. Naya knelt beside the tracks, touching the dirt lightly. The impressions were fresh, less than a day old. They were marching her mother toward the river outpost, where planters often traded enslaved women they considered troublesome. If they sold her mother before sunrise, Naya might never find her again. A twig snapped behind her. Naya turned slowly. A silhouette stood at the edge of the trail, tall, unmoving, watching her. Not an overseer, not a soldier. A man wrapped in swamp mud and deer hide, hair bound in a warrior's knot. His eyes gleamed ancient and steady in the fog. A Seminole scout, one of her father's old allies. He raised 2 fingers in greeting. "You hunt in the dark," he said in Mikasuki. "But the dark hunts you back." "My mother," Naya replied. "They're taking her east." He nodded once. "Then we go east." Naya blinked. "We?" "You carry your father's war club." His voice was low, respectful. "No one carries such a weight alone." For the first time in days, Naya allowed herself a small breath, not relief, but recognition. She would not face this next battle alone. The scout stepped onto the trail, motioning for her to follow. "Come, before the sun betrays us." Naya gripped her war club, her heartbeat matching the distant rhythm of the swamp. The fire had been only the beginning. Now, the hunt began. Tala woke before the sun, heart pounding as if her own ribs were a drum signaling war. She had dreamed of her mother again, not as the broken woman inside the cedar shack, but as she once was, tall, proud, hair threaded with beads, the scent of river mint in her braids. A Seminole woman who hunted panthers, fished with her bare hands, and laughed like she was unafraid of anything in this world. "I am still here," the dream mother had whispered. Della rose with that voice echoing in her bones. The plantation was stirring the usual murmur of chains, the shouts of overseers, the creak of wagon wheels, but everything felt distant. Today was already set in her spirit. Today the path split in 2. Live beneath these men forever, or make sure they did not live to see another morning. She walked to the weaving shed, pretending to begin her usual work. The others saw the tension in her shoulders, but said nothing. Della had long carried storms behind her eyes, yet this morning, there was something different, something sharper, like a blade hidden under cloth. The shack, where her mother lay imprisoned, stood at the far edge of the fields, past the hog pens, past the dying cypress grove no one dared enter after dusk. The overseers used it as a punishment cell too small for a grown woman to stand, too cold in winter, too hot in summer. Della had seen women come out unable to walk, unable to speak. Some didn't come out at all. She knew her mother's time was running thin. By midday, she had already stolen what she needed. Strips of turpentine-soaked cloth, 2 shards of iron, and a handful of dry moss she'd been hiding in her skirt hem. She tucked everything into a basket of weaving reeds, making it look like she was simply carrying her day's work. She moved through the yard calmly, but her pulse hammered as the overseers watched her pass. Reed, the youngest one, the one with pale eyes that never blinked long enough, leaned against a fence post as she walked by. "You've been too quiet this week," he muttered. "Girls like you don't get quiet unless you're hiding something." Della kept weaving her fingers through the reeds, pretending not to hear him. Her silence always bothered him. It had kept her alive so far. He stepped closer. "Look at me when I speak to." A bell clanged from the barn. Reed cursed and turned away, summoned by another overseer. Della breathed again only when he was gone. She slipped into the cypress grove where the air grew thick and still. Spanish moss hung like gray curtains, hiding her from sight. Here, the ground swallowed footsteps. Here, enslaved families whispered to their dead. She reached the shattered trunk she'd marked months ago. Inside its hollow, she'd hidden the small clay jar her grandmother's teaching sealed inside it like a heartbeat waiting. Crushed pine resin, river salt, ash from lightning-struck wood, a Seminole fire blessing, a curse, if one wished it so. Tala rubbed the ash across her palms, murmuring the words her grandmother had spoken when they buried a panther, when they lit night fires to frighten bad spirits, when they taught children to be unbreakable. Let flame walk where I walk. Let it choose its hunger. The air shifted, warm though the grove was cool. She pressed her forehead to the trunk. Mama, hold on. I'm coming. She closed the jar, hid it again, and stepped back into the open fields. The sun was starting to drop, staining the cane rows gold like a warning. Now she waited. The overseers always grew careless at sundown, drinking in the yard, laughing, shoving the younger enslaved girls around as if cruelty were a sport. Tonight would be worse. The master was away, leaving his 6 overseers to rule like dogs without a leash. Tala counted the minutes by the shadows stretching across the dirt. Reed, Clancy, Burke, Miller, Harding, Tolliver, 6 men who beat her mother, 6 men who chained her for speaking her own language, 6 men who spat on her and called her wild blood, 6 men who swore the shack was the only place capable of breaking her. Tonight they would all be in one place, and tonight she would walk into that place with fire disguised in a basket. When the sky finally deepened into the blue of a fresh bruise, Tala lifted her basket and headed for the shack. Her steps were steady, almost ceremonial. In the distance, she could already hear the overseers inside, laughing, drinking, arguing over dice. They always used the shack as their evening den, claiming it was private, that no one would dare come near it. They were right about the last part except for her. As she approached, the laughter grew louder. She could smell whiskey, sweat, and beneath it all, the faint scent of her mother, still alive. A soft groan drifted through the cracks of the wood. Tala's jaw tightened. The storm inside her uncoiled. She lowered her head, gripping the basket, and whispered to the ground, "It begins tonight." Night seeped into the swamp slowly, like ink bleeding into paper. The trees stood dark and motionless, their moss hanging low and wet. Fireflies glimmered between the reeds like watchful yellow eyes. And in the middle of that damp, breathing wilderness stood the old cypress shack, the place every slave whispered about, and every overseer used as a threat. It was where they took the ones they meant to break. It was where they had taken Neka's mother. Neka approached it barefoot and silent, her painted stripes now smudged, her braid half unraveled, her muscles trembling from the swamp chase, but her eyes were steady. She had stalked the 4 overseers who dragged her mother inside. She had memorized every sound they made, the crunch of leaves, the thud of boots, the low, drunken laughter that promised violence. Now she crouched behind a rotting stump, the torch in her fist unlit, her other hand resting on the club strapped across her back. Her breath came slow and controlled. She remembered the words of her grandmother, "If you fear, you die. If you hesitate, they win. But if you strike fast, the swamp will hide your sins." Inside the shack, a man yelled something crude. Another laughed. A third spit. A fourth slammed a door. And then her mother's voice, ragged and exhausted but unmistakably hers, crying out in pain. Neka's stomach twisted. Her hand tightened on the torch. That sound was enough. Enough to erase doubt. Enough to turn her blood into hot fire. The plan she'd built in her head during the long hours stalking them began sliding into place. Every plank of wood, every crack in the wall, every gap where smoke could escape. She had seen them earlier leave a pile of pine pitch near the shack, used for lighting torches on patrol. She had gathered it quietly, spreading it beneath the boards. She wasn't going to sneak in. She wasn't going to fight them one by one. She was going to burn the shack down with all of them inside. But first, she had to get her mother out. She crawled around the back of the shack, slipping through mud and cattails. The boards here were old, warped. She found the one she'd marked with her thumbnail earlier loose enough to pry open. Inside, by the dim lantern light, She saw her mother slumped against a post, wrists tied above her head. Her lip was bleeding. Her breathing was thin and shaky. But she was alive. Neka pressed her fingers to the gap. "Mama," she whispered. "It's me. I'm here." Her mother's eyes opened slowly. For a second there was confusion, then relief, then fear. "No, child," she whispered. You run. You run far from here. They won't let you take me." Neka shook her head, fierce and quiet. "They won't stop me." "Yes, they will," her mother rasped. "There's more coming. You can't fight all of them." "I'm not fighting," Neka murmured. "I'm ending it." Her mother's breath hitched. She understood, then understood what her daughter intended, and terror flickered in her eyes. "Neka, you can't burn them alive. I promised I would end every hand that touched you," Neka said. Her voice didn't tremble. It hardened like metal cooling. "And fire is the only thing they fear." Someone inside shouted, "Where's that rope?" "Check the back wall." Neka's mother flinched. Neka didn't. Her plan was already rolling forward like a storm. She slid the small knife she carried through the gap. "Cut your hands free. Quickly. When you hear me shout, you run through the back. Don't look at the fire. Don't look at the men. Just run." "Neka, do it," Neka breathed. A fist slammed against the inside wall. Someone cursed. Neka moved. She circled to the front of the shack, dipped her torch into the pine pitch-soaked leaves, and struck flint. The flame burst to life, hungry, bright, crackling. She whispered one word into the darkness. "Now." Then she shoved the burning torch under the shack's foundation. Pitch ignited instantly, roaring upward in a violent whoosh. Inside, the men screamed in confusion. Boots crashed. Someone yelled, "Fire! The whole damned floor's on fire!" Another cursed her mother for escaping. They scrambled, terrified. Neka didn't move from the doorway. She was a silhouette against the rising blaze, face expressionless. Her mother burst from the back moments later, staggering through cattails, coughing. Neka sprinted toward her, grabbed her by the arm, and pulled her deep into the reeds. Behind them, fire climbed the shack walls in long orange fingers. The overseer's screams grew high, panicked, animal. Someone beat against the door. Another slammed into the shutters. But Neka had wedged the porch beam across the entrance earlier. There was no escape. Flames swallowed the roof. The swamp lit up like the sun. Neka held her mother close while the shack collapsed in on itself, the screaming fading, the crackling growing louder. Only when the fire was nothing but glowing ribs of cypress wood did her mother speak. "What have you done, Neka?" "What I had to," Neka answered softly. "For you." Her mother looked at her, tears streaking ash across her cheeks. "Then we must run," she whispered. "Tonight, before the whole plantation comes hunting." Neka nodded, gripping her war club. "They can try." The dawn rose sluggishly over the Seminole settlement, light seeping through the trees like molten gold. For weeks, Tala had moved in silence, the memory of her mother's anguish driving each careful step. Yet, the events of that night in the cypress shack burned in her mind as vividly as the flames that had consumed the overseers. She crouched by the river, water reflecting her sharp eyes and the scarred palms that had gripped the war club the night she fought back. Around her, the forest hummed with life birds calling, insects buzzing, but Tala heard only the echo of screams that had dissolved into ash. The village had been warned. Word of the incident traveled like wildfire. 6 overseers gone, bodies never found, a single Seminole girl standing against their tyranny. Whispers of Tala's courage swelled, a mixture of fear and reverence. Children hid behind their mothers as she passed. Men who once treated her as a mere girl bowed their heads in respect. But Tala knew the forest had eyes. Every shadow seemed to watch her, reminding her that vengeance was never truly complete. The planters would send others, men more cunning, more dangerous. Her mother, now free, insisted she flee, but Tala's heart refused. She had tasted the fire of retribution, and she would not let fear dictate her life. That morning, Tala retraced the route to the cypress shack. The place still smoldered, smoke curling like spectral fingers. Charred wood crunched beneath her feet. The air carried the smell of burnt earth, hair, and remnants of powder from the torches. She knelt, placing a small bundle of herbs she had collected on the ashes, a token for the spirits who had guided her hand that night. "Thank you," she whispered. The wind stirred, as though acknowledging her words. Her mother's hand touched her shoulder, warm and steady. "They can never hurt us again," her mother said. Tala only nodded, though her eyes searched the horizon. The Seminole had allies hidden in the bayous, warriors ready to defend the village should the planters' wrath descend. Tala moved through the reeds, every sense alert, each step measured. Her war club, now worn and blackened from the fire, hung across her back like a badge of her courage. Even as the sun climbed higher, Tala felt the weight of the night's justice. The memory of the overseer's screams, the heat of the flames, and the smell of burnt flesh remained, but so did a strange, heavy satisfaction. She had saved her mother, protected her village, and delivered a lesson the planters would not soon forget. Yet in the distance, shadows shifted unnaturally. Tala stiffened, realizing that even heroes must never drop their guard. The forest was alive, watching, waiting, and though she had claimed victory once, she knew it would demand her vigilance always. She rose, shoulders squared, eyes sharp. Tala would continue to walk the line between fear and fury, between life and the memory of fire. The cypress shack had burned, but its lesson lingered, a warning in the smoke to all who would dare enslave again. That day, Tala walked with the weight of history on her shoulders, the fire in her heart, and the spirits of the fallen guiding her path. She was no longer a girl. She was a sentinel, a protector, a force the bayou would not forget. The forest whispered around her, and Tala listened. The world was dangerous, but so was she, and she would not be broken again. Night draped over the Seminole village like a velvet curtain, thick and heavy, as if the bayou itself held its breath. Tala moved silently along the narrow paths that wound through the reeds, her eyes scanning the darkness. Her mother had insisted she rest, but Tala felt the pulse of the night calling her forward. Danger had a rhythm, and she knew how to listen. The village slept fitfully, the fires dim, smoke curling upward into the sky. Yet Tala sensed a disturbance, a subtle shift in the air, the soft crack of a twig underfoot, the faint ripple in the water. She paused, war club in hand, and felt the vibration of approaching feet. Not many, but enough. Men with intent. "They're here," she whispered, voice as quiet as the wind brushing the moss. Emerging from the shadow of the cypress trees, 3 figures appeared, cloaked in dark leather and carrying torches that painted their faces with flickering orange. These were not overseers. They were bounty hunters, men known for their cunning and cruelty. Tala's heart tightened, but fear did not touch her. She had faced worse and survived. The first man stepped into a shaft of moonlight, his eyes widening as they met Tala's. The stories had reached them, the girl who burned the cypress shack, the daughter who struck down 6 men with fire and fury. For a moment, hesitation froze them. Then the men advanced. Tala shifted, stepping into the thick reeds, using the shadows as her allies. Her war club was an extension of her will, and with each movement, she calculated, anticipating the hunter's every action. The first torch fell into the water, sizzling as reeds caught fire. Tala moved like a wraith, silent and lethal. She struck the nearest hunter across the knees with the flat of her club, a crack echoing through the swamp. He collapsed, screaming. The others faltered, glancing at their fallen comrade. Tala didn't pause. She darted between them, swinging with precision, each motion controlled, fluid, deadly. Her mother's lessons in survival, the instincts honed from nights hiding along the bayou, all guided her hand. By the time the last torch sputtered out, the hunters lay unconscious or retreating into the darkness, their threats extinguished as thoroughly as the flames they carried. Breathing heavily, Tala stood alone amidst the damp reeds. The bayou was quiet again, save for the whispers of the wind through the trees. Her mother's hand found hers, grounding her. "They will come again," her mother said softly, voice trembling. "The world does not forgive what we have done." Tala nodded. "Then we will be ready." Her gaze swept the horizon, taking in the dark waters and the flicker of distant lightning. "This bayou is ours, and so are we." In the night, the spirits of the cypress shack lingered, but they were no longer angry. They had witnessed justice, and Tala had honored it. The fires had been fought, the blood repaid, and the lesson etched into the soil. Those who sought to harm her people would face a force they could not reckon with. The swamp sighed, deep and steady, as if approving her courage. Tala's war club rested across her shoulder, her eyes gleaming with unyielding resolve. She had faced fire, darkness, and men who thought themselves gods over the lives of others, and she had survived. The bayou whispered her name in the rustle of the cypress trees, carrying her legend across the waters. Tala's story was now inseparable from the land she protected, the mother she saved, and the justice she wielded. She moved back toward the village, war club in hand, every step measured, every sense alert. The night had tested her, and she had passed. The Seminole girl who burned the cypress shack was no longer a myth. She was a sentinel, a protector, a shadow of vengeance that would haunt those who dared threaten her people. The fires of the past had shaped her. The river of her courage flowed strong, and the bayou embraced her as one of its own. Tala would stand ready, as she always had, guarding her family, her village, and the legacy of justice that had been written in smoke, ash, and fire. The night had grown heavy with mist, the kind that clings to skin and whispers secrets in the ear. Tala moved along the narrow embankment where the bayou widened, the water dark and slow, reflecting the faint glow of distant stars. The village lay quiet behind her, sleeping under the watch of towering cypress trees, but Tala's instincts told her the peace was fragile. She paused, listening. A soft splash echoed from the water's edge, followed by the rustle of reeds. Her grip tightened around her war club. She knew these sounds. They were deliberate, not the idle stirrings of animals. From the shadow, 4 figures emerged, their shapes barely distinguishable in the fog. Unlike the last intruders, these were larger, faster, and carried a cruel precision in their movements. They were the men who had tracked the fire of the cypress shack, bounty hunters armed not only with steel but with the hunger for revenge. "You should not have survived the last night," one growled, voice low, carrying across the water. "The girl who burns shacks will not survive the bayou." Tala smiled faintly, eyes glinting in the starlight. "I have lived through worse," she whispered, stepping forward. "And I am ready for you." The first man lunged, torch in hand, swinging wildly. Tala sidestepped, letting him stumble into the muddy bank. The war club met his side with a dull thud that echoed into the night. He fell, groaning, and the others hesitated. Tala pressed the advantage, moving like water through the reeds. Her body was a weapon, her mind a trap. The second man came at her from the right, but she ducked, sweeping her club in a low arc that caught him across the knees. He collapsed with a shriek. The 2 remaining men froze, glancing at each other. They had underestimated the girl who had become the shadow of the bayou. Tala did not hesitate. With each movement, she anticipated, struck, and retreated, drawing them deeper into the reeds where the water pooled around their boots. A sharp crack sounded, a branch breaking underfoot, and one man slipped into the shallow water, sputtering and screaming. Tala followed swiftly, her war club raised. With a precise strike, she knocked his weapon aside and delivered a blow that left him unconscious in the reeds. The last man tried to flee, but Tala was already upon him, her movements silent yet decisive. She struck his shoulder, then his leg, forcing him to the ground. He looked up at her, eyes wide, and in them she saw the same fear she had seen in every man who dared harm her family. "You have a choice," she said, voice calm and deadly. "Leave now, or you will join the others in the bayou." The man scrambled backward, crawling into the fog, the sounds of his panicked footsteps fading. Tala remained still for a moment, listening to ensure he had truly gone. The bayou exhaled around her, the mist curling like smoke over the water. Tala lowered her war club, muscles tense but alive with the thrill of survival. The night had tested her once again, and she had proven herself not merely a survivor but a force to be reckoned with. She looked toward the village, the fires dim but steady, and felt the weight of her mother's gaze. The Seminole girl who had burned the cypress shack, who had defended her home against men twice her size, had now become the sentinel of her people. The bayou was her ally, the shadows her shield, and her courage had woven itself into the very soil of her homeland. Tala's breath misted in the night air as she whispered, "No one will harm those I love while I draw breath." The water rippled around her feet as if affirming her oath. Somewhere deep in the bayou, the echoes of past battles, fire, and vengeance whispered their approval. Tala, daughter of the Seminole, guardian of her mother, and terror of the unjust, stood alone in the mist, unwavering, unbroken, and unyielding. And in that darkness, the bayou embraced her fully, its daughter, its warrior, its legend. Years passed over the bayou like drifting clouds, leaving the land itself changed, marked by the memory of the fires that had burned and the blood that had spilled. Tales of Tala, the Seminole daughter who had defended her mother with unmatched ferocity, began to weave through villages and plantations alike, whispered in the hush of kitchens, carried along the edges of the cypress swamps, and murmured under the canopy of live oaks. No man dared approach the bayou at night without a story warning them of the girl with eyes like amber fire and hands that could shatter bone. Those who had witnessed her wrath firsthand either disappeared into the reeds, returning to tell fragmented, terrified tales, or never returned at all. Over time, her legend grew part fear, part awe, part reverence. She became the living shadow that haunted any who sought to harm her people. Tala herself changed with the seasons. The girl who had fled the shack now walked the swamp with deliberate calm. Her muscles, honed by relentless survival, bore the marks of a lifetime spent in vigilance. Her mother, once fragile and enslaved, now moved freely alongside her daughter, protected by the very fear that Tala instilled in every would-be aggressor. And though Tala rarely left the bayou, when she did, people spoke of glimpses of her moving through towns and markets with the air of authority that seemed to bend men and women alike to respect her presence. The bayou itself became a sanctuary, its waters a mirror to the power Tala held. Hunters, bounty seekers, and oppressors learned to leave offerings or turn back before stepping into the mists where she walked. In the reeds and cypress knolls, they whispered that the spirits of the fallen men she had vanquished still lingered, tethered to her resolve, ready to strike anyone who approached with ill intent. It was said that if you listened carefully to the night wind, you could hear the echo of her war club striking in harmony with the soft hum of the bayou, a warning and a lullaby all at once. Yet Tala's story was not solely of vengeance. She became a guardian, an unspoken protector of the weak and marginalized. Families who had been hunted, enslaved, or threatened found refuge in the swamps under her watch. She taught those who would listen how to move silently, to survive in the wilderness, and, when necessary, how to defend themselves. Children grew up learning the story of the Seminole daughter who had stood against overwhelming odds, shaping her legend into both terror and hope. As decades passed, the edges of her tale blurred into myth. Some claimed she had become one with the swamp, her body unseen, her presence felt only in the whispers of the wind. Others insisted she married no one, for no man could match her spirit or command her loyalty away from her sacred mission. What remained certain was the fear her name invoked, even long after the last men she had fought were gone from the earth. Travelers passing the bayou swore they saw fleeting shadows dancing over the water, reflections of a woman taller, stronger, and more fearsome than any natural form. The elders of nearby villages would warn children, "Tala watches the bayou. She sees the hearts of men. Fear her, respect her, and honor her." And so, her legend persisted, a haunting and eternal testament to the girl who burned, fought, and protected with unyielding courage. Generations later, people still spoke of Tala not merely as a fighter, but as a symbol. She embodied the unbreakable will of those oppressed, the relentless pursuit of justice, and the primal power of a daughter defending her mother. The bayou, forever changed, held her memory in its rippling waters, its whispering reeds, and its towering cypress trees. Every new moon, it was said, the water shimmered with the faint reflection of a girl who had dared to stand alone, and whose courage had rewritten the fate of the swamp. And so, in the twilight hours when the mist hugged the earth and the stars burned faintly above, the legend of Tala endured, not just as a story of vengeance, but as a living testament to the strength, spirit, and unbreakable resolve of one Seminole daughter who refused to be silenced. The bayou claimed her name, her deeds, her essence, and in return, she claimed it as her own, forever untouchable, forever feared, and forever revered. The swamp breathed in quiet approval, carrying her story to those willing to listen. And in that hush, one could almost hear the soft, steady hum of a war club tapping against the roots of cypress trees, Tala's heartbeat, the pulse of a legend that would never die.